50 Strangest Unsolved Mysteries Part 2. 11. The Ghost Ship of the Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, a British-American ship called the Mary Celeste was found abandoned and floating in the Atlantic Ocean. It was found to be perfectly seaworthy and with its cargo fully intact, except for a lifeboat, which it appeared had been boarded in an orderly fashion. But why? We may never know because no one on board was ever heard from again. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York bound for Genoa, Italy in November 1872. The ship was manned by Captain Benjamin Briggs and 7 crew members, including Briggs' wife and their 2-year-old daughter. Supplies on board were set to last for 6 months, and there were luxurious items on board including a sewing machine and an upright piano. Historians and commentators generally agree that to abandon such a worthy ship, some extraordinary and alarming circumstances must have arisen. However, the last entry on the ship's daily log reveals nothing unusual, and inside the ship, all appeared to be in order. Conspiracy theories over the years have included mutiny, pirate attack, and even a giant octopus or sea monster attack. However, the cause behind this ghost ship remains unsolved. 12. The mysterious death of Tupac Shakur. On September 7, 1996, at the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, well-known rapper Tupac Shakur was seen attending a Mike Tyson boxing match. After the match, Tupac left with the CEO of Death Row Records, Suge Knight. Upon the departure of the match, Tupac and his bodyguards got into a fight with Compton-based Southside Crips gang member Orlando Anderson in the lobby of the MGM. After the fight was broken up, Tupac and Knight left in Knight's car with Tupac's entourage following in cars behind them. While stopped at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval, a white Cadillac pulled up to the passenger side of Knight's car and shot out of the window, hitting Tupac 4 times and grazing Knight in the head with a bullet fragment. In 2014, retired LVPD Sergeant Chris Carroll revealed that he was the first police officer at the scene. According to Carroll, when he opened the car door, Tupac fell out of the car, covered in blood, and Carroll asked, "Who shot you?" Tupac took a deep breath and only proclaimed explicative words at the police officer before slipping into unconsciousness. Tupac was then taken to UMC and placed on life support and into a medically induced coma. On September 13, 1996, 6 days after the shooting, Tupac died as a result of his injuries at the age of 25. Las Vegas police never arrested anyone in connection with the murder. They also failed to follow up with Yaki Gaddafi, a member of Tupac's entourage who claimed he could identify the assailant. Unfortunately, Gaddafi was murdered only 2 months after the infamous shooting before he could be interviewed. To this day, no one has been claimed a suspect and no arrests have been made. 13. The Watcher House. In June 2014, Maria and Derek Broaddus and their 3 young children were getting ready to move into their new home, 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. They claimed the 6-bedroom house was their dream home, and located just a couple of blocks away from Maria's childhood home in one of the top 30th safest cities in the United States. 3 days after closing the sale, before the Broaddus family had even begun to move in, a letter arrived in their new mailbox. The letter was addressed to the new owner, in big clunky handwriting. The typed letter read as follows: "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one." The letter also mentioned specifics about the Broaddus family. "You have children. I have seen them," the letter continued. "So far I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call them and draw them to me. At the bottom of the letter, the author used a cursive font to sign, "The Watcher." After receiving the letter, the Broaddus family reached out to the previous family who had sold them the house, John and Andrea Woods. They stated that during the 23 years of living at 657 Boulevard, they had never received a letter like that except once a few days before they were getting ready to move out of the house. The Woods family also stated they had never felt watched in the 2 decades they had lived at the house and, in fact, rarely felt the need to lock their door at night. While they thought the note they received was odd, they threw the note away without much concern. Still, the 2 families went to the police with the letter, and an investigation was opened. The police warned the families not to tell anyone about the letters, including their neighbors who were now all suspects. 2 weeks later, even though the Broaddus family still hadn't moved in, they received a second letter with even more chilling specifics about the family, including the children's birth order and nicknames. The Watcher also asked, "Will the children sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I will know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then, I can plan better." Several weeks later, the Broaddus family had put their plans on hold to move in. A third letter arrived saying, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you." By the end of 2014, the case had stalled. There was no digital trail and the mental effects were taking a toll on the Broaddus family. There were no fingerprints and no way to place somebody at the scene of the crime. Only 6 months after they received the letters, they decided to sell the home. 657 Boulevard has been sold and is currently off the market while the Watcher's identity still remains a mystery.
14. The Mystery of the Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of Circleville, Ohio, began receiving threatening mail that has haunted him ever since. The letters were from Columbus but had no return address. They accused school bus driver, Mary Gillespie, and the school superintendent of having an extramarital affair. One of the letters was even addressed to Mary's husband Ron that threatened his life if he didn't put a stop to the affair. In 1977, Ron died in a suspicious one-car crash that involved gunshots. However, when the sheriff ruled the death an accident, other residents of Circleville began receiving letters accusing the sheriff of covering up the so-called accident. Ron's sister's husband, Paul Freshour, was convicted of writing the letters after there was an attempt to murder Mary via a booby-trap-rigged pistol. Even after he was thrown behind bars, the Circleville letters continued throughout the 1970s and the early 1980s. Freshour even received one in prison. In 1994, Freshour was released, and he claimed his innocence until his death in 2012. The true identity of the Circleville letter writer remains unknown.
15. The Sodder children disappearance. On the night before Christmas in 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, George and Jenny Sodder were asleep with 9 of their children when a fire started in the house around 1 o'clock in the morning. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape. The remaining children, 14-year-old Maurice, 12-year-old Martha, 9-year-old Louis, 8-year-old Jenny, and 5-year-old Betty still remained in the house. Between the 5 of them, they shared 2 bedrooms located upstairs. George broke back into the house to save the rest of the children, but the staircase was on fire. When he went outside to retrieve his ladder, it was missing from its normal spot. Plus, both of his coal trucks, which he was going to use to stand on top of, were strangely not starting. Marion, one of the children who escaped the fire, ran to a neighbor's house to phone the fire department, but the operator didn't pick up. When another neighbor called, the operator failed to pick up the phone again. That same neighbor actually drove to town and found the fire chief in person, F.J. Morris, and told him about the fire. However, even though the fire station was located a mere 2.5 miles away from the house, the firefighters didn't reach the Sodder home until 8 a.m., 7 hours after the fire began. When they got there, the house was literally burnt to ash. Authorities sifted through the ash to try and find the remains of the missing 5 children, but nothing was found and they were presumed dead due to the fire. Morris suggested that the fire was so hot that it literally cremated the children's bodies, including their bones. While that theory sounds reasonable, it's not entirely accurate because even when flesh is burned away, bones are typically left behind. Additionally, there was no smell of burning flesh reported during or after the fire. The cause of the fire was deemed to be bad wiring and the 5 missing children were issued death certificates. Soon after the fire, George and Jenny began to suspect that their children were not dead but instead kidnapped, and the fire was deliberately set as a diversion. In fact, George had the wiring checked earlier that fall by the power company, which had deemed the wiring in safe working order. While the fire was in progress, a woman came forward and said she saw all of the 5 missing children peering from a passing car. Another woman who was staying at a Charleston hotel had seen the children's photos in a newspaper and said she had seen 4 of the 5 a week after the fire. The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of the Italian extraction, she said in a statement. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile, and wouldn't allow it. From the 1950s until Jenny Sodder's death in the late 1980s, the Sodder family maintained a billboard on State Route 16, with pictures of the 5 vanished children and offering a reward for information. The last known surviving Sodder child, Sylvia, still doesn't believe her siblings perished in the fire. To this day, they have never been found.
16. The Axeman of New Orleans. Starting in 1918 and over a period of 18 months, the city of New Orleans was haunted by a serial killer known as the Axeman. The Axeman was the personification of the boogeyman, only attacking at night, and was rumored to be responsible for 12 attacks and 6 deaths. To make this mystery even more chilling, he seemed to only creep on his victims while they slept. Oddly enough, the Axeman never used his own tools and only used what he could find in the victim's house, usually an axe, which he then would leave at the scene of the crime. The majority of the Axeman's victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many citizens of New Orleans to believe that the crimes were ethnically motivated. Many media outlets drew frenzy from this aspect of the crimes, even suggesting mafia involvement despite the pure lack of evidence. Other crime analysts have suggested that the Axeman killings were related to sex and that the murderer was perhaps a sadist specifically seeking female victims. Other theories include that the Axeman killed male victims only when they blocked his attempts to murder women, supported by cases in which the woman of a household was murdered but not the man. A less likely theory is that the serial killer committed the murders in an attempt to promote jazz music, suggested by a letter that the murderer himself was rumored to write, which stated that he would spare the lives of those who played jazz in their homes. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. On February 25, 1957, a body of an unidentified boy was found in a box in an illegal dumping ground near Philadelphia. The boy was estimated to be around 4 to 6 years old, weighed about 30 pounds, and stood around 3 feet 3 inches. He was found naked but wrapped in a blanket. His hair was recently cut and his body was recently washed clean. There were small scars on his chin, groin, and left ankle, some of which proved he went through a small medical procedure. He was found with blunt force trauma to the head that was determined to be the cause of death, and there were no witnesses. The body was found by a young man who was walking through the abandoned lot. Strangely, the man waited a whole day before contacting the police, and even a second man had previously found the boy's body but had not contacted the police because he didn't want to get involved. With the cold weather and delayed phone call, police weren't able to accurately estimate the time of the boy's death. In order to identify the boy, the body was kept in the morgue while visitors from 10 different states tried to look for identifiable marks to no avail. Police sent out 400,000 flyers of the boy to police stations, post offices, and courthouses all over the country. Even the American Medical Association sent out a description of the boy, but it led nowhere. The police compared the boy's footprints to hospitals in the area and even took fingerprints, but no records showed that the boy ever existed. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a forensic facial reconstruction of the victim and added him into their database. Unfortunately, the boy has never been identified and the case still remains open.